And now we're going to keep discussing these tariffs that the U.S. has put on countries all over the world. Joining us now live is Tony Kinnett, national correspondent for the Daily Signal. He's also a former teacher and host of the Tony Kinnett Cast. Tony, thank you so much for joining us today. Let's start with what we heard from Treasury Secretary Bessent on CNBC, right? 70 countries, give or take, now reaching out to try and make a deal. Now, countries that have confirmed discussions we've seen include Israel, of course. Prime Minister Netanyahu was just here, Japan, Vietnam, South Korea, and this is just to name a few. How long before we could see a potential deal from what you're seeing?
Well, that's the golden question, isn't it? And thank you very much for having me on. Always a pleasure to be with y'all. I think the key issue here is the end goal of these particular tariffs. And depending on the Trump official that you hear from, you're going to get a totally different answer. If you listen to Peter Navarro, you're going to hear that these tariffs should be a permanent fixture on the American economy. But if you listen to Elon Musk or Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, you start hearing an idea of reaching a free trade zone, zero tariff or zero tariff deal structure that would benefit American manufacturers, perhaps a corporate tax cut to also lure American manufacturers. There is a key component of the trade conversation, the tariff conversation that we don't talk about, and that is it's a negotiation, right? It's foreign policy. You don't lay out all of the cards on the table, although, of course, the market would really appreciate that. The market loves clarity and stability. But when you're negotiating with countries, if you say, well, this is only going to last for 90 days, well, then all they have to do is ride you out. And I think that that's a key aspect that's often forgotten in the uncertainty surrounding these tariffs.
All right, so speaking of this negotiation, Tony, we can't forget about China, right? Trump said
Right.
today that China wants to make a deal badly, but they just don't know how to get it started. We also heard from White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt today, quote, "It was a mistake for China to retaliate. When America is punched, the president punches back harder. That's why there will be 104% tariffs going into effect on China tonight." All right, are we likely to see any negotiations here started anytime soon?
Negotiations through probably some proxy groups, perhaps. I would say yes. You might see some conditions that are set up in order to ease tensions. I would expect these possibly to start as soon as the Iranian negotiations, which are set for Saturday. The problem, there are two issues with China. Number one, China uses a lot of what is close to slave labor. And that type of economic travesty, that human and moral rights travesty, is something that the United States, especially the Trump administration, is loath to ignore. And by the way, that type of economic action also moves over to the way that China, as a geopolitical adversary of the United States through its Belt and Road Initiative, tries to coax other countries into participating in their illicit trade system. And the Trump administration is looking at that while also recognizing that China is dependent on the U.S. market just as much as the U.S. purchasing sector, the kind of soft market, the Amazon purchases, let's say, are based on the Chinese market. So there will have to be some type of a negotiation made here. But I think it's true when the statement is made that Xi's team doesn't know how to begin, because normally they're making rude gestures to America in the South China Sea, in the coves of the Pacific. And to immediately go to a let's de-escalate is not something that communist regimes are typically known for.
And I've spoken to other experts who say China kind of can't back down right now if it wants to keep up this image of power. But I mean, it's facing a slowing economy.
Well
It's
said.
facing domestic issues, right? Weak purchasing power. There's the whole housing crisis there. Could China's refusal to back down here, despite those issues, actually end up helping with Trump's ultimate goal of cutting U.S. dependence on Chinese manufacturing?
Yes, and I think that you cited a couple of experts who've made some phenomenal points about the culture right now, the civil unrest in some of China's more rural regions. The further you get from Beijing, the more concerning things get for the regime's grip on the country socially and politically. And what you're seeing is kind of a similar thing to Iran right now, where you have these regimes that have basically been built on bluster and oppression that are simply losing stability as the internet grows, as a globalization makes these out to be the destitute messes that they are. We're seeing this with North Korean soldiers right now fighting in Russia's war on Ukraine. You're starting to see the power of that nation to its own people lessen. So you're right. China can't back down. China can't back down on Taiwan either, no matter how much they might want to internally. And it's creating a rock and a hard place of their own invention, to use the colloquial, that might end up with the Chinese Communist Party fracturing in some way that definitely helps the Trump administration. I think that's a very accurate summary.
All right, well, let's take a look now at the stock market because it rebounded a bit today. Do you think that's going to relieve people's worries at least slightly?
Maybe. I think that right now you're seeing a lot of up and down style chaos. And while I personally was able to buy a bit of the dip in the last couple of days, now seeing the market go up and then kind of meter out towards just over 100 points in gain at this particular moment, it doesn't necessarily. Oh, thank you for throwing the graphic up. I'm glad that over 100 points was accurate when I said that. I think that when you're looking forward, you need a couple of days of stability here with the market. And if these deals start to go forward, I think you're going to see a surge that hasn't really been seen since Trump's first term in office.
All right, so then, Tony, you've spoken with some economists about these tariffs. What are they telling you about the impact they'll have on Americans, both short term and long term here?
Well, on my show, I really wanted to get kind of both sides of the right leaning conversation on economics. The left, the Democrats appear to be avoiding this entirely, which is rather bizarre. And so I brought on Daniel DiMartino, who's a more free trade absolutist, and then EJ Antony, who's more of a moderate and understanding of the Trump proposals from over at the Heritage Foundation. And both of them suggested that if these were used as long term tariffs as a standard for the US economy, the results would be extremely detrimental. But whereas Daniel perhaps suggested that it looked like the Trump administration simply loved tariffs and this would be passed on to the consumer, EJ was a bit more hopeful, the economist from the Heritage Foundation, in suggesting that there is still a good sign that this is being used as leverage against other countries for unfair trade policies. And that despite the maybe suspicious way that these trade deficits were calculated, as the Trump charts at the Liberation Day gathering showed, it still does appear that other countries coming to negotiate will, in fact, if Trump takes the deals or sets new deals, be a massive boon to the American economy. And that's an excellent thing.
And Tony, I think you're bringing up a central question here of whether these tariffs are going to be simply a bargaining tool or a long term commitment that's here to stay. And yesterday we heard a reporter ask that. President Trump said, hey, why can't it be both, you know?
Well, I think that the key here is, again, President Trump is the one holding the cards. If he answers that question, the game is up, right? And like Sherlock Holmes, he wants the game to be afoot. He wants there to be a bit of question in world leaders because, again, think about it. If you're at a table of any kind of a game and you know what your opponent's cards are, you know your strategy changes. You can outlast them. You can make decisions based on what they are or are not able to do. And as long as President Trump continues to say, I don't know, maybe they're going to be forever, maybe they'll be for a few days, that depends on your actions. That actually pushes world leaders to come to the table and make pretty decent deals. And again, if he holds to that, like I said, that is the golden question, then we could see some really great negotiating strategy here. And that it's not being asked a little bit more when Trump says things like this is, I think, a rather interesting. And this seems a little more obvious to me.
Well, Tony, I love that Sherlock Holmes analogy there. The game is certainly afoot. Tony Kinnett, thank you so much for coming on today.
Have a great afternoon.